When tying flies and placing your material on the hook, you want to put that material so that it stays directly on top of the hook shank. But if you place the material on the hook shank and then just start to wrap your thread, as you can see, it begins to wrap the material around the hook shank and create somewhat of a mess. So in order to get that material to stay where you want it, we use something called a pinch wrap or soft loop. In this case, you place the material in the position on the shank of the hook, bring the thread up in between the thumb and index finger, pinch the thread, and then go behind the shank of the hook with a little tension to create a loop between your thumb and index finger, and then back in front. In this case, as you pull up on the bobbin, that loop that was created between your thumb and index finger gets pulled directly down on top of the material, holding it in place, and then you can put on 2 or 3 more good securing wraps. I'll try to show you what this looks like by getting my thumb out of the way. We first make the pinch, go behind the hook shank and back in front. Again, as I take my thumb out of the way, you can see that creates that loop. As you pull up on the bobbin, that brings that loop down directly on top of the material, holding it in place, and then 2 or 3 good securing wraps. Once again, make the pinch, go behind the shank of the hook, back in front. That creates that loop. As you pull up on the bobbin, brings that loop down on the material and secures it in place, and you can put 2 or 3 more good securing wraps to hold it. To finish the fly, we use what's called a whip finish, and most of us use a rotating whip finish tool to accomplish this. This tool has a place that I refer to as the spring. The other end has what I refer to as the hook. And in order to do a whip finish, you take the spring, hook the thread between the eye of the hook and the source with the spring, and then hook the top thread coming from the eye of the hook with the hook of the rotating tool. At this point, you allow the tool to rotate under, forming a triangle, and then work that triangle up to the head of the thread. Here's the triangle I'm talking about, and it's this thread coming from the hook on the whip finishing tool that goes down to the eye of the hook. That's the piece of thread we're trying to wrap. At this point, you don't hold your source thread snugly because you need thread to come from that area, and so you just rotate that thread around the eye of the hook. I go about 3 times. Slide the spring up to the eye, unload the thread, pull down on the source thread, which brings the hook of the whip finish tool down to the eye, and then unload the hook. And that's a completed whip finish. Again, load the spring, create a sharp V from the eye of the hook to the spring, back to the source thread, snag the top thread coming off the eye of the hook, rotate under forming a triangle, work that triangle up. Again, this is the piece of thread we're trying to wrap. Go around about 3 times, bring the spring up, unload, pull the source thread down, and unhook. I usually put about 3 whip finishes on a fly, and at that point you can cut your thread. I rarely use head cement because those 3 series of whip finishes will hold it. I will use head cement on the larger headed saltwater flies from time to time. Again, in tying flies, fairly common we use a pinch wrap or soft loop to hold materials in place as we tie them onto the hook shank. And then as we work those materials forward and want to finish the fly, we need some way to secure that thread so it doesn't come undone. And usually here's where we use a whip finish on the head of the fly.